Greetings, comments, people. Thank you for coming out on this wonderful spring or summer. Is it summer yet? It feels like it. Pretty depressing to me personally. I don't know how you guys feel, but all the same, glad you guys are here. And I'm going to go and stick with tradition, as Charlie normally does. We're just going to pray. He normally prays for another church, particularly here in Flagstaff. But kind of to tie into what I want to talk about ultimately today, I'm going to pray for something called the Cruisin' Health Mobile down in Phoenix, which is this really cool idea that was started by a couple of organizations down there, mainly Phoenix Children's Hospital, where they take basically free health care to the homeless population, but mainly the children, like homeless kids in Phoenix, which there's a shocking amount of them down there. But all I'd say, it's not necessarily a Christian organization, but they're doing something that I believe Jesus would have anyone do. So I'd just like to pray for them, because I think it's a really cool thing. So if you are the praying type, go and join me. Dear God, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for the people involved in this truly loving organization that's taking place down in Phoenix. And I just pray that you would bless them in whatever way that you see fit, and help them to continue to bring love and service and healthcare in whatever way they can to those in need down there. In your name, amen. I don't really like doing this in particular, but I'm here, so do it, I suppose. So, yeah, like Greta said, my name's Clay, for those of you who don't know me, and I'll just start by telling you at least a little bit about myself before we dive in. Yeah, Charlie's still finishing up his last little session in Scotland, which is really cool. So I feel very honored to be able to stand up here today and attempt to share with you guys something meaningful. But first thing you guys should know is I'm from New Mexico, which I'm very proud of that fact. Is there anybody else in the room from New Mexico? One? Okay, that's good. Well, if you guys don't know, anyone from New Mexico usually is almost too proud of the fact that we're from New Mexico, and it's a little out of control. I have several friends that have like countless tattoos all over the place about New Mexico, their New Mexico pride, the Zia symbol, which is our state symbol from one of the native tribes there. They have like green chilies tattooed all over them, stuff like that, which is really great. I have an aunt who takes green chili with her no matter where she goes. She goes to Hawaii every year and she freezes it and takes it in an ice chest so that she can eat it nonstop. She's obsessed. Obviously, she's from New Mexico. I have a friend. My favorite tattoo is one of my good friends. I think he might have gone a little bit overboard, but I still think it's great. He has an outline of the United States, and it's missing Texas. That's undoubtedly, I think, one of my most favorite tattoos. But in his defense and in mine, there's a reason that I think any New Mexican has to kind of compensate and be extremely proud for where we're from. And it might have to do simply with the fact that we have like 0 professional sports teams or anything else like that, where other states might compensate by taking pride in that area. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the fact that nobody really knows who we are. And to give you a story of this, a few years ago, I was in the bashes here in Flagstaff, and I was going to purchase some alcohol, and so I showed the lady my ID. So I was still in school, and I still had my New Mexico driver's license, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't accept this." And I was like, "Okay, like, is it expired? You know, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware." She's like, "No, it's up to date. We just can't accept identification from out of the United States." And I just looked at her, I didn't really argue because I was still trying to process what she actually said. So she saw my confusion and she was just like, "Oh honey, it's okay, I'll let it go this time, just let me buy my beer." I was like, "Okay, thanks." And I left. One example. Another example is when I went to college here at NAU, we used to take trips back to Carlsbad, New Mexico, where I'm from. And we would go camping and caving down there all the time, so I'd invite any of my random friends to join me. And one of my friends, we were in the car on our way, and she was really hesitant about the trip, asking how long it was going to take and everything else like that. I was like, "Yeah, it's about a 9-hour drive. I know it's a long way." She's like, really? I don't understand. We're going to get there in 9 hours. It's like, well, I don't know. We just go through Albuquerque and then down and whatever. It's like 9 hours. I do it all the time. She's like, yeah, but don't we have to drive all the way across Texas first? And I was like, well, no, not really. So also why we have to be so proud is because we're right directly next to Texas, which everybody knows about. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, everybody knows who Texas is, and nobody knows Mexico. The last example is the same trip. We returned, and one of my friends who couldn't make it, I asked them why, and they told me that it's because they couldn't find their passport. So, yeah. I'm from Mexico. I'm very proud of that fact, and there's just a slight introduction as to why. A little bit more about myself, and kind of getting into what I want to share with you guys today, is ultimately today I want to talk about suffering and depression, and general the idea of evil and suffering in the world, and attempting to have a conversation to reconcile that with the God of Christianity. I'm going to go ahead and just get an idea of what time it is, because I'm not really good at doing this. I have no idea how long things might go, so I'll try to do my best. So the reason that I end up wanting to talk about that today is because with my own personal journey in life and journey in faith and belief in God, it's something that I feel like I've struggled with constantly and asked myself countless questions regarding the problem of pain, the problem of evil in the world today. And it's because I think I grew up and I've struggled with depression for many years, still do and probably will, for as long as I live. And I think everyone in this room, in some fashion or another, whether you believe in God or whether you don't, whether you believe in Jesus, whether you don't, we can all admit that there is pain in the world, there's evil in the world, there's suffering in the world, and I feel like we're all in it together in some fashion to attempt to figure out how to deal with it. And so it's had a huge impact on my faith and on my journey and on my walk with God. And it's brought me to places, very dark places, very stale places. I think some of you, when I say the words depression or apathy or anger or suicidal thoughts, you guys might relate really well with me. Some of you may have no idea what that's like to experience those things, and that's fine. But one way or another, I think we all play a part in addressing the issues of this world, whether it is on a very personal level like that, a very emotional level, or the simple level of the tragedies that happen all over our world today, from terrorist attacks or tsunamis or 9/11 or anything like that. It affects us all one way or another, and we experience it one way or another. And so for me personally, these things have brought me to a point of questioning the divinity of Jesus, questioning God. And I was raised in a church, and I was raised to pray. I was raised to believe in Jesus and God all my life. But ultimately, the idea of suffering and pain in the world has brought me to question all those things, sometimes in a healthy way, sometimes in a very unhealthy way. And it's brought me to a point of atheism for a period of my life. But ultimately, it's brought me back to believing in a loving God. And before I go any further, I'm going to bring up those quotes by N.T. Wright. We're going to start with this, just because I feel like it's a very difficult topic to talk about, which God knows why I decided to talk about it, because this is sort of this. But here we go. So these are a couple quotes by N.T. Wright. He's in his book Surprised by Scripture, which is also just something I've been reading, so you guys are going to get stuck hearing a lot of these ideas too, just because it happens to be what I'm into at the moment. So I'll just go and start by reading these before we go into it, because I think they help set it up fairly well. And he's saying, first, there are no easy answers in Scripture or elsewhere. If we think we've solved the problem of evil, that just shows that we haven't even understood it. We cannot say with that dreadful hymn that all our pain is good. That induced a moral chaos worse than the one created by Job's comforters. Nor can we say that evil is good after all, because it provides a context for moral effort and even heroism, as though we could get God off the hook by making the world a theater, where God sets up little plays to give his characters a chance to show how virtuous they really are. That is so trivializing to the point of blasphemy. So first and foremost, we should know that there are no easy answers. I think he says that because he just kind of includes what some would call a very easy answer to solve this problem of evil, especially to reconcile it with God, in the sense of he just wants to throw us every extreme one way or the other to see how we respond and to see who's going to step up and be a hero. But it's not that simple. And so we'll start with that. There are no easy answers. Second, the line between good and evil does not lie between us and them, between the West and the rest, or the left and the right, between the rich and the poor. That faithful line runs right down the middle of each of us, every human society, every individual. This is not to say that all humans and all societies are equally good or bad. Far from it. Merely that we are all infected and that all easy attempts to see the problem in terms of us and them are fatally flawed. So I just think that's another really good point, to ever come to the assumption or conclusion that us here in the West have it figured out, the rest of the world is evil, or us Christians have it figured out, the rest of the world is evil, or any culture, any society, any religion. The reality is we're all human, and that line, like he says, is right down the middle of us, and it's something that each individual has to deal with on a daily basis. So I just want to start with those two quotes because I felt like that just helps someone else's words. It's much more smart and better with words than I am to just kind of set the tone here. So from there, kind of like I was talking about earlier, in general, you could say there's two types of suffering in the world. And one, just to really break down in the most simple way possible, there is human-induced suffering. It's very easy to see how we humans bring suffering upon ourselves. We do pain to other human beings. And then the other aspect, and an example of that would be any terrorist attack, individual accounts of us interacting with each other, or something like 9/11. The other side of it is natural disaster and the suffering that brings. Obviously, how a tsunami or an earthquake can kill thousands of people in one day. How do we reconcile that with a God that loves us and created this world and put us in it? So the easy answer or kind of like a quick introduction into answering those, and Charlie talks about this fairly often, is, for one, God has given us free will, and this kind of addresses the first one, humans bringing suffering upon other humans. God has given us free will. He's given us free will because he loves us. And ultimately, he doesn't want to take that away and intervene, per se, because it needs to be our choice. And he does that because he loves us. And if we lived simply in a world where we didn't have a choice, where we didn't have a choice to love and we didn't have a choice to hate, and there were no extremes on one way or the other, as you guys have heard Charlie say several times, it would be just a utopia that you get neither. The sweet just isn't as sweet without the sour, and love doesn't exist without hate, and hope doesn't exist without despair, so on and so forth. That kind of addresses the first one. The second one is a little more difficult to address, but apologize. I'm trying to work through this. And, well, I guess that in a way that does address the second one, simply that, God doesn't want us to live in a strict utopia, and I don't think I don't even have the words to be diving into the simple problem of evil that I am, but trying to reconcile, well, maybe we'll just get to it later in the talk. But, so that's from there we have those two types of evil, and the questions that are often asked is, why would God create such a world that exists in? And like I explained earlier, of the utopia and the extremes, that's one simple answer. And then, say we even move beyond that, usually the second question to be asked is, why, regardless of why God created this world the way he did, or why he allowed suffering and evil to even be a part of it, to move on from there, the question that's often asked is, why does he not save us from it then here and now? Regardless of why or how it was created, why is he not saving us from it? And I think the simple answer to that, right off the bat, is he has and does save us from it. It's just not in the way that we want. It's not in the way that we desire, and it's not in the way that we expect. And to be quite just Christian theology, reconciling this with the God of Christianity, he saved us through coming down to this earth and partaking in the suffering with us, and obviously did that through Jesus and Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. But even going back to the culture of that time, the Jews believed in the Messiah. That was their way of reconciling the evil and the oppression that they were experiencing in the world, is they believed in this Messiah. They believed that the Messiah was going to come and to save them and set things to rights and just, boom, come in power and things would be good to go. When Jesus came, that's clearly not what he did. Instead, we get a picture of what Jesus did painted in Isaiah 53, which, go and bring that up, Ryan, I guess. It's really long. I was debating whether or not to read it. But I suppose we'll probably just go through it, because I think it really paints a good picture of the contrast of what the culture at the time was expecting when Jesus came and claimed to be God, and claimed to be the Son of God, claimed to be the Messiah, and what they actually got. Instead of this powerful figure, political figure, figure of war coming to save and bring the world to rights all in one big bang. Instead, they get this, which is the prophecy in Isaiah 53. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and grew and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent. So he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and who can speak of his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sins of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. So that was long, I know, but clearly that does not paint a picture of some great Messiah coming to save the world and set everything to right. And clearly that shocked Jesus' followers at the time, especially when he started talking about how he was going to go to the cross and how he was going to die. And when that actually happened, when he actually died, it led them to deny him, to turn away, and to freak out, and to doubt, and to lose hope, because he did not come to save the world and take their suffering and their pain and their evil away in the way that they wanted him to. So that's the simple answer to that question. Why does God not save us from this evil and from the suffering that we experience oftentimes on a daily basis in this world? And the answer is he has. It's just not the way that we want. And that's one of the key points that I want to address as we move on. So that's the answer to that question. He saves us through the cross. It's just not what we want. And clearly that was not what the disciples wanted at the time. But moving next, I want to ask, how do we apply that to our culture, to our day, and to what we deal with today, the struggles and the suffering that exists in our world? Obviously, a lot has changed drastically since the time of Jesus. But something that's really interesting, that's kind of cool, is there is a bit of historical context of something that was happening and very prominent in the day of Jesus that I think has drastically affected our world, and especially the America that we live in right now. And go and bring up that picture of Mars Hill, and Charlie posted this actually on his trip. He went and visited Mars Hill, which is a really cool spot. And I kind of wanted to steal some of his thunder because whenever he comes back, we all know that he's just going to show us a ton of pictures and like brag about his travels and everything else that he does. So this way, at least I get to take one of his pictures and talk about it and show it to you guys before he even gets back. But in his caption when he posted this, he said, this is where, among several things that happen here, this is where in Acts 17 it says that Paul stood and debated with a lot of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers of the day. And so that's pretty cool that, that place actually exists, and Charlie was able to go there and see it, and many people have, which is great. But I want to talk a little bit about Epicureanism because, like I said, in Acts 17, that was one of the philosophies of the culture that Jesus was up against, as well as Paul, and that they were discussing and debating things, and oftentimes in a friendly way, but oftentimes not. These guys were just curious about what these people had to say. And this was a culture filled, and this is in Athens, which is a culture that at the time was filled with several different Greek gods, several different forms of pantheism, which is what the Stoics believed, where basically that is believing that the earth is God and nature is God. There is no creator, it is just divine. So the things that they deal with, there's just gods everywhere. And that's where Epicureanism was born to an extent, because the Epicurus, his way of answering the problem of separating the world and reconciling with any god was to say that, God or gods existed and they created this world that we live in. However, they are no longer with us. They have separated themselves and moved on, and they're no longer here. They're no longer going to save us, and now it's up to us to find our own source of happiness and to find our own solution to get rid of this problem of pain and suffering in the world. So that's how Epicureanism was born. And to me, that on paper, that's a very appealing mindset to be like, oh yeah, like maybe this world was created by a god or gods or something good or greater than us, but it's clear due to the evil that we experience on a daily basis that God is now gone and separated from us. And so that was the type of things that Paul at the time at this very place was, he was debating with these guys and exchanging philosophies. And obviously Paul's philosophy was that of Jesus and the cross and the resurrection and how Jesus came to save us and did save us, but it's on his terms and on God's terms. And that God does in fact love us and created this world for us to redeem it. So that's just a small bit of history of Epicureanism, and the reason that I want to bring that up is because I feel as though we live in a very Epicurean culture today. So it's something that existed in the time in which the culture of the New Testament was written in, but I feel like it's very applicable to the world that we live in right now. And I feel like Epicureanism, even Thomas Jefferson was one who claimed to be an Epicurean, as well as several others, leaders of our country and others in history. And it makes sense because it's a very easy answer to that question, to be like, God is erased from the issue. Maybe he was here once, but he no longer is, and now it's up to us. And that has led us to the culture that we live in now, where we make our own decisions. We decide what is right and what's wrong to some extent, which is why it's very easy for Thomas Jefferson to pick and choose from the Bible as he did. He took every bit of moral teaching that Jesus taught, and he said, this is great, but anything that Jesus had to say about being God or divine or to save the world, he basically threw out because he didn't believe in that. And Epicurean has led to these splits. It's led to the separation of church and state. It's led to the separation of science and religion, and ultimately it's led to the separation even of the way we use our brains. And I think one answer among many is to reconcile these splits and separations that Epicureanism has caused in our world. And just to go out on a slight tangent about the way we use our brains and how deeply I think that this has affected us today, I was reading a study that somebody performed, I can't tell you who, but basically the right side of our brain According to the studies, the side of the brain that processes like art and poetry and metaphor, music, and ultimately religion, of course, because then faith and spirituality, things of that nature come into play. That's all on the right side of our brain. The left side of our brain basically processes like hard numbers, brute facts, statistics and calculations, straight history, things like that, very tangible things of that nature. And they say that by doing this study, the way that the brain is designed to work is that we're supposed to perceive the world first with the right side of our brain. We take everything in through art, and through music, and through poetry and metaphor, and this kind of like slightly less tangible, more spiritual view of the world. That's how we initially are meant to take things in. And then from there, it's supposed to move into the left side of the brain to where we break it down and attempt to figure out and understand it in more factual-based content. And I think with Epicureanism and that idea taking off in America, we've separated those things. That we have science over here and religion over here. Along with the religion is the right side of the brain only, and along with science is the left side of the brain only. And I think undoubtedly what needs to happen before we can even attempt to answer any of the difficult questions, much less the question of pain and suffering in the world, is there needs to be some sort of unity of those things brought back together. I apologize, like I said, I'm not very good at this for all the pauses. So, I guess on that note, in an attempt to reconcile these things, well, before I go into that, I think something interesting that I read about Epicureanism is it was, how it applies to our culture today. It was initially brought about because Epicurus was he was basically fed up with the way people were treating their gods of the day and how they feared them and how they bowed down to them nonstop and were doing basically trivial things nonstop, whether it was sacrifices or different prayers, on and on and on. And three of the main gods that you could exclude of that day were basically the Greek gods, Mars, Aphrodite, and Mammon. Mars was the god of war, Aphrodite was the god of erotic sex, and Mammon was the god of money. And these, among several other gods, were constantly feared by the people, and they just lived their lives in unreasonable ways. And that's when he was like, guys, this is getting out of hand. These gods mean nothing, they control nothing, and we need to get back to trying to get the world back to rights, and we need to do it ourselves. So there's a part of that I actually admire about him, because I think to an extent that's true. He just didn't fill in the gap, whereas that's what Paul would have been doing when he was debating with them there on Mars Hill. He simply filled in the gap. He said, these gods are doing nothing for you. You need to stop serving them in the way that you are and replace them with the one true God and attempt to get on his page for the world. So, all that to say, I find it interesting that come full circle back today, Epicureanism was brought about and has done a good job of eradicating, in that culture, the gods of the day, and in our culture, the God, I would say, in America of the day, which is the God of Christianity. But it's interesting because it seems as though now that those three gods of that culture have now replaced the God of our culture. And you come back, and even though we live in a very Epicurean world, a very separated world from our life and God, if you look at any aspect of our lives in the world that we're raised in, it is extremely driven by sex, money, and war. And to tie that back into the problem of pain and suffering, these things undoubtedly could very easily be attributed to the human cause of suffering and pain and evil in our world. So I just find it interesting that, and almost ironic, that Epicurus meant to eradicate these gods, yet they've come full circle, and it's ended up eradicating the one true God, and then bringing these back into our culture, which is what we now worship, and is causing what I would believe to be much pain and much suffering. So there's those things, and then the other thing that I think Epicureanism has done, in our view, is it's distorted what we actually believe to be good and what we actually believe to be evil. And basically, I feel like human beings have their general idea of what is good and what is evil with a lowercase g and a lowercase e, whereas God has a different perception of that. And that's what Jesus and the cross and the resurrection and the New Testament writers were attempting to get at, and I think that's what we need to attempt to follow as well. And the reason that they're so different is because when we separate God, what do we have to turn to besides our own emotions? And any negative emotion that you would experience as a human being, we generally suffer because of that, and I think that's immediately related to evil. And I don't think that's necessarily the way that God would have it be. He sent himself here to take on the sufferings of the world and have Jesus suffer. And if you read anything in the New Testament, it's just littered with that. It's just littered with this idea of suffering. And by no means do I think that, we just need to go out there and suffer and live in martyrdom and go die for whatever else. I don't think that's what God calls us to do. But I don't think it goes in the other extreme either, where we're not simply called to just live the American dream and find anything that we can do to make us happy. And I think that's where we miss the perspective a little bit of what true pain, true suffering, and true evil is and what it's for, is that our definition is oftentimes much different than what God's definition is. So I guess at this point, Charlie usually asks the question, so what? And I had a professor in college, Dr. Madu, and he used to make us write papers. They were called WDDIMs, and you would say, what difference does it make? And I really like that idea because it doesn't really matter what you know or what you think you know. I think if you can't figure out the so what question or the what difference does it make and how to apply it to your lives to make a change or apply it anywhere, it's probably not worth that much. And so I guess that would be my intent now, is to ask that question, so what, or what difference does it make? And with that, I guess I just want to encourage you guys to maybe open up your minds and open up your hearts to a different viewpoint of what pain and suffering looks like for us, especially here in America, and maybe just ask those questions of, is it truly evil, or is it attempt to ask the question of what is God's definition of pain and suffering in the world as opposed to ours? And I guess I say this a lot because in my personal struggle, I've dealt a lot with depression and apathy and anger and things of this nature. And when this first entered in, I got a lot of thought about, just pray and ask God to get rid of it, just ask God to heal you of this. And I absolutely believe that God does do miraculous healings to some extent, but at the same time, I believe that He refrains often, and I think that's because part of the solution to this problem is He wants to work through us. He wants to use us to be a part of the solution. He doesn't want to simply just eradicate all of these things from us. He wants us to learn and to grow and to be challenged and to take on His character in and of ourselves. And there's no way that we can take on God's character and truly understand what He wants for this world to bring it to rights unless we go through the process ourselves. And so I say that because that was something that I had to go through myself, and I had to question God, I had to question my own experiences in the midst of depression. And if anyone struggles with that, I know how debilitating it can be. I know how cumbersome and impossible it even feels like to live life normally. And so I'd just like to encourage you, for one, to say that you're not alone in that. God is there with you, and ideally the church and your fellow human beings are there with you as well. God is not scared to go to those places. God is in those places. That's what I love more than anything about Christianity. I've studied a few different religions in my time in college, and one of the only religions where the God Himself actually comes down and takes every form of suffering that we humans endure, that was Jesus. He came down and did that for us. And so just know that no matter how dark anything that it is that you're going through, just God is there with you, and He's willing to go there with you. You should never be afraid to speak your mind or your emotions or your lack of emotions or anything. God is willing to experience that with you, but at the same time, He he wants to save us from it, but he wants to do it on his terms, and just open up your mind to what those terms might be. And it's going to be a process, and likely it'll be painful, but I think if we seek him out truthfully with a whole heart, he will come through for us in the end in some fashion. So we'll move into the time of communion now. And I guess just keep that in mind as we go into this time. This calendar will eventually come up, and we'll have a song. And ultimately, I guess I just want us to readdress the question of what it looks like for God to use us to eradicate the world of pain and evil and suffering, and to heal and help the people around us, whether that's ourselves or whether that's the people around us. Human beings are, as we all know, capable of doing immense evil to one another here in America and across the world. I can only hope that means that we're capable of doing a much greater good. And I think we just need to start asking the question of what that might be, whether it's to help ourselves or to help those around us. So communion is an open time. We encourage anyone, if they're willing to partake, in a remembrance of what Jesus did on the cross. There certainly could be many reasons that you choose to refrain, and that's quite right as well. So go and bow your heads and we'll pray. Dear God, I thank you for these people here, and I thank you for this world that we live in. And I thank you for the love that you have given us and the things that you have taught us. And I ask right now that you would show us any and all aspects of your character and of your plan for this world and for our hearts, and that you would open our hearts and our minds to what your truth and to what your definitions of true good and true evil are. I just pray that you would just bless us, God, and help us to remember the way that you have come into the world to save us and allow us to see new eyes and new hearts in the way that it was intended to be seen. We love you, Lord, and we thank you. It's in your name. Amen. All right, a couple of closing thoughts. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys for putting up with my disjointed, scattered brain thoughts, attempting to comprise something like that. I want you guys to know that I am very much a firm believer in happiness and joy and doing things that you believe in on the lighter scale of life. Even if that's living the American dream, by no means do I think that sex or money is evil in and of themselves. What I don't want is for any of those things to ever become so much of a divine or God worship power that they distract us from the truth and ultimately distract us from pain and suffering in the world, whether it's in our own hearts or in the hearts of the people around us. I feel like that pain should always be addressed in some fashion or another, and God is there and He's waiting for you to address it, whether it's in your own heart or the hearts of people around you. To go back to what I was talking about, who we prayed for, Randy Christensen and the mobile health mobile. This is something that's really cool that we got turned on to when Charlie gave the challenge several weeks ago, basically to get involved in social justice in some fashion. He brought up the sex trade. We got turned on to this book that's called Ask Me Why I Hurt, the children who hurt the doctor or the children who nobody wants and the doctor who heals them. And that's this guy that is the doctor on this mobile health mobile taking health care and several different forms of care to the homeless children in Phoenix who are just riddled with oppression and suffering because of the lives that they've been brought up in, and they deal with depression and physical illness all the time. There's people out there that are trying to help them, which is why I wanted to bring that up, and I wanted to pray for those people, but also wanted to turn you guys on to just the reality of that. Is the homeless population that exists in Phoenix, the sex trade that exists in Phoenix, a lot of times due to this homeless population of people that are preying on these little kids as a way to sell them into prostitution and make money, is a clear form of evil and suffering in our world that I think should never be ignored. And this one is only 2 hours away from us. It's not far at all, and undoubtedly I think things like this still happen in Flagstaff. So I hate to be such a downer, but I do not want these things to ever be ignored. I think we as Christians are called to address them in some fashion. And so there's a couple websites that I'm going to have Brian Peterson put up. I'm just going to leave them up here, that are people that are already on board doing these things. And so there's just something very tangible that I can challenge you guys with to address these issues. Check this out, just become educated. I'm extremely new to becoming educated on several of these issues as well. I still don't really know what to do, but at least at this point we can attempt to become educated and figure it out from there. So yeah, right now, thank you guys for coming. The most important part is when you guys walk out these doors, go be with each other, have fun, and good night.